For over 800 years, the galaxy had one simple truth. Humans were farmers, good for growing food, writing poetry, and staying out of the way. In a chamber filled with 200 species screaming about the end of the world, no one even glanced at the human ambassador. That was their biggest mistake. Stick around to find out why you never, ever underestimate a farmer. On the main view screen, 12,000 red dots crept across the star map, a plague of death heading right for us. This was the Krath Dominion, a 50-year-old nightmare come to life. They were warriors born and bred, living by a simple, brutal code. The strong conquer and the weak serve. They'd already enslaved billions and wiped 40 star systems from the map. Now they were coming to finish the job. Panic was a universal language. Ambassador Trix, a tiny creature covered in white fur, cried out, "We can't win. They have 12,000 ships, we only have 4,000. Another representative, a hulking being of living stone, boomed, "Then we offer them treasure." "You fool," hissed a serpent-like ambassador coiled around a post. "The Krath don't bargain. They take everything." The shouting started all over again, a symphony of fear. And in a forgotten corner of the room, the human delegation sat in silence. Just 3 of them. Ambassador Elena Chen, a woman with graying hair and eyes that held the stillness of a deep lake, was flanked by 2 nervous-looking aides. Nobody ever bothered the humans. We'd shown up on the Galactic scene 847 years ago, expecting wonders. We dreamed of exploring the stars and learning incredible new technologies. Instead, the great galactic powers looked at our lush green Earth and said, "The galaxy doesn't need another scientist or warrior. It needs food." And just like that, humanity became the galaxy's breadbasket. For centuries, we were seen as simple, peaceful, and utterly unimportant, exactly as we'd planned. Suddenly the room went dead silent. A new face filled the screen, a monster with gray, stony skin, 4 powerful arms, and eyes like black pits of cruelty. It was Admiral Vorath, the commander of the Krath Armada. "Greetings, Galactic Council," he growled, his voice like shifting rock. "I speak for the Dominion." Our High Chancellor, trying to sound brave, stammered, "Admiral, surely we can find a peaceful solution." The Admiral actually laughed, a horrible, grating sound. "Peace? Oh, you misunderstand. We're not here to talk. We're here to deliver a message. In 72 hours, we arrive. You have 2 options. 1, total surrender. Every person, every planet, every resource becomes ours. 2, total annihilation. We will burn your worlds to ash." "That's insane," cried Ambassador Trix. "We are billions of lives." "Yes," Vorath agreed with a chilling smile. "Everything you have is about to be ours, or you will be wiped from existence," the voice hissed from the giant screen, its lipless mouth twisting into a grotesque grin. "You have until our fleet arrives to surrender. Choose wisely." The transmission cut out, leaving the galactic chamber in stunned silence. A heartbeat later, the room exploded into pure panic. Dignitaries were openly weeping. Others screamed into their comms, desperately trying to warn their homeworlds to flee or give up. But in the small, overlooked human delegation, Ambassador Elena Chen rose calmly. She turned to her assistants. "Get me a secure channel to Earth," she said, her voice steady and low. "You 2 stay put. Watch everything. Tell me if anything changes." "Ambassador," one of her aides whispered, his voice trembling. "What can we possibly do? We don't have a fleet. We don't have advanced weapons. We're just a planet of farmers." Elena held the young man's gaze for a second, and in her eyes, he saw something ancient and fierce. It was a secret humanity had guarded for 1,000 years. "Just watch," she repeated softly. "And don't you worry." With that, she slipped out of the chamber through a small service exit. No one saw her leave. In the grand scheme of the galaxy, nobody ever paid attention to the humans. The following hours were a storm of frantic arguments and hopeless plans. Alliances were forged and then shattered moments later. Some races vowed to fight to the last ship, others were already drafting their terms of surrender. Hours later, as despair settled over the chamber, a technician suddenly gasped. "Chancellor," she yelled, her voice shaking, We've got something. A new reading. Everyone's heads snapped toward the screen. They expected to see more Krath ships. They were wrong. Way behind the Krath Armada, in a stretch of space that was supposed to be completely empty, a colossal energy signature had just appeared out of nowhere. "That's not possible," someone whispered. "There's nothing out there." But the reading wasn't wrong. It was growing, swelling into an energy source bigger than a star. As the entire council watched in stunned silence, something began to tear a hole in the fabric of reality itself. Things were coming through. "Multiple contacts," the technician reported, her voice barely a whisper. "Hundreds, no, thousands of them." At that exact moment, Ambassador Elena Chen walked back into the chamber, calm as ever, and took her seat. Her aide stared at her, but she just folded her hands and watched the screen. Out of that impossible hole in space, an armada of ships emerged in perfect silent formation. Their hulls were jet black, their designs were alien and terrifying, and they weren't broadcasting any identification codes. "How many?" the Chancellor breathed. The technician swallowed hard. 15,000 ships, Chancellor. 15,000 unknown warships just appeared behind the Krath. The fear in the room changed. The Krath were a known monster. This was something else entirely. As the council descended into a new kind of panic, the little furry ambassador Trix turned to Elena Chen, her eyes wide with terror and a sliver of hope. "Who are they?" she pleaded. Ambassador Chen finally allowed herself a small, thin smile. "Old friends," she said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "We call them the Terran Defense Fleet, and they've been waiting a very long time for someone to pick a fight. Imagine being told your entire history was a lie. For 800 years, humanity was known as the quiet, unassuming farmers of the galaxy, completely overlooked. But that was about to change forever. On the bridge of the warship Dominion's Wrath, the four-eyed Admiral Vorath glared at his monitors, convinced they were broken. His crew shifted nervously, no one daring to speak. "It's a sensor glitch," Vorath finally grumbled. "That's the only possible answer." His science officer swallowed hard. "Sir, with all due respect, we've run diagnostics 17 times. The readings are solid. There are 15,000 ships right behind us." Vorath turned, his huge gray frame making the command bridge feel small. His eyes, black as a vacuum, locked onto the officer. "Ships don't just materialize from thin air. They don't exist without a history, and they certainly don't lurk in empty space for fun." He took a heavy step forward. "Find out what's real, or I'll find a new science officer." Another crewman interrupted. "Admiral, the unknown fleet is just holding its position. They're not moving toward us, but they're not backing down either. They're just waiting." Vorath swung back to the main view screen. A perfect formation of black, silent vessels hung in the void. 15,000 ships, utterly still. It was unnatural. Fleets were noisy, chaotic things. This was something else. It was, Vorath had to privately admit, deeply unnerving. "Open a channel," he commanded. "Let's find out who these ghosts are." The message went out, and for several long, tense minutes, the only reply was static. The ghost fleet stayed completely silent. "They're not responding," Vorath declared. "Maybe they can't, or maybe they won't. Either way, they're irrelevant, a ghost story. We proceed to the core worlds. They can follow us or not. It makes no difference to me." His first officer spoke up cautiously. "Admiral, shouldn't we at least investigate? We have no idea what they're capable of. Turning our backs on a force this large is exactly what we're going to do." Vorath cut him off. "I've brought 40 star systems to their knees. I've crushed fleets 10 times this size. Unknown doesn't scare me. It just means I haven't conquered them yet." He settled back into his command chair. "Set a course for the core worlds, full throttle. If these ghosts want to fight, let them try and catch us." As the Krath Armada surged forward, the Galactic Council on Concordance Prime was in a state of absolute panic. This ghost fleet had appeared from nothing. The ruthless Krath were ignoring them, and the entire galaxy was holding its breath. High Chancellor Vithanar had every historian, every analyst digging through archives. But the answer was always the same. Nothing. These ships had no history, no design schematics, no origin point. They were, by all accounts, impossible. Could they be a precursor race? Hissed Representative Seiler, a serpent-like creature coiled tightly around his perch. The builders, perhaps? The ones who made the jump gates eons ago? Ambassador Trix fluffed her white fur in terror. The builders vanished millions of years ago. If they're back now, what could they possibly want with us? A being made of living rock rumbled hopefully. Maybe they're here to save us from the Krath. Seiler hissed again. Or maybe they're here to wipe the slate clean. The enemy of my enemy is not always a friend. The chamber descended into chaos, a mix of desperate hope and chilling fear. But in the human delegation's corner, Ambassador Elena Chen's aides kept glancing at her, searching for answers. She offered none. She just watched the screen, her expression perfectly calm. Finally, one young aide couldn't stand it. He leaned in and whispered, "Ambassador, you know something. I can tell. Please, what is happening?" Elena turned her head slowly. Her eyes seemed to hold the weight of centuries, a deep sadness mixed with unshakable pride. "Just watch," she said, her voice soft but firm, "and remember every detail. One day you'll tell your children this story. They will need to know why today was so important." Before he could press her, the main screen changed. The ghost fleet was finally on the move. "They're advancing," a technician cried out. "The unknown ships are closing on the Krath Armada, and they are moving incredibly fast." The chamber went dead silent. Every alien race watched as the wall of black ships ate up the distance to the Krath fleet, moving as one unified entity. Aboard his flagship, Admiral Vorath watched with a predator's interest. "Well, finally," he sneered. "Some action." He had to give them credit. They're disciplined, I'll say that much. But discipline doesn't win wars. Big guns and thick armor win wars. Let's see what these ghosts are really made of. He leaned forward, a grim smile on his face. If it's a fight they want, it's a fight they'll get. All ships turn to engage the enemy. Prepare to fire. Today we add ghosts to our list of trophies. 12,000 Krath warships, conquerors of 40 star systems, turned in unison. Their weapons hummed to life, their shields flared. They had never known defeat, and they didn't plan on learning today. The ghost fleet kept coming. Then, a signal pierced the silence. It was broadcast on every channel, in every language in the galaxy, but it started with one: a human voice. "Krath Dominion vessels, you are in violation of the Protected Worlds Treaty. You have one opportunity to withdraw. You will not be warned again." The message ended. On Concordance Prime, you could hear a pin drop. A human voice? But humans were farmers. They didn't even have a real military. Every single head in the chamber swiveled to the small human section. Ambassador Elena Chen rose slowly to her feet. She didn't have to say a word. Her calm, knowing expression said it all. She had been waiting for this day for a very, very long time. "Ambassador Chen," the High Chancellor stammered, his voice trembling. "What is this? What do you know about that fleet?" Elena met his gaze. Then she looked around at the hundreds of alien faces that had ignored her people for 800 years, faces that had dismissed humanity as weak and insignificant. "I know," she said, her voice echoing in the silent hall, "that the Krath should have taken the warning seriously." Before anyone could even process her words, the main screen exploded with silent, terrifying light. The one-sided battle had begun. On his bridge, Admiral Vorath stared in disbelief. The ghost ships had opened fire, but his sensors detected nothing. No lasers, no missiles, no projectiles, just nothing. And then his fleet began to vanish. The first Krath warship simply ceased to exist. 1 second, it was there, shields up, guns hot. The next, it was a silent, expanding cloud of vapor and debris. No impact, no warning. Then a second ship vanished, and a third, and a fourth. "What is happening?" Vorath roared, his arrogance finally cracking. "Report! What kind of weapon is this?" "We don't know, sir," his science officer screamed back, his voice raw with terror. "There's nothing on the sensors. No energy readings, no mass. Our ships are just disappearing. The shields are useless. The armor might as well be paper." The silent destruction continued, ship after ship after ship. The Krath Armada, the most feared military force in the galaxy, was being dismantled by an invisible, unstoppable weapon. Vorath watched his legacy, his empire, turn to dust on the view screen. 12,000 ships, the pride of his people, erased from existence. "Fire back!" he bellowed. "All ships, fire at will! Annihilate that ghost fleet!" What was left of his armada unleashed hell. Thousands of weapons fired at once, a storm of energy and matter that had leveled entire civilizations. But the ghost fleet didn't even flinch. The attacks landed. Vorath saw them hit, but the black ships didn't crack, didn't smoke, didn't even slow down. They just absorbed the punishment and kept on erasing his fleet. It was a nightmare. It was the end of everything the Krath had built. On Concordance Prime, the Council watched, paralyzed by awe and terror. The battle was over in 11 minutes. In just 11 minutes, the most powerful armada the galaxy had ever known was reduced to floating scrap metal. When the dust settled, only 347 Krath ships remained, the few who had powered down their weapons and begged for their lives the moment the fighting started. The Ghost Fleet had spared them. 15,000 black ships now floated silently in the wreckage without a single scratch on them. Then, slowly, as one, they began to turn. They turned away from the debris and toward the core worlds, toward Concordance Prime, toward the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted in a new kind of panic. The fear of the Krath was gone, replaced by the terrifying unknown of their saviors. This was a fear that went way beyond what was on the view screen. Ambassador Elena Chen stood in the heart of the chaos, completely still, completely unaffected. She simply raised a hand. "Hello, Chancellor," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the panic like glass. "I'd like to address the Council, if I may." Vithnar stared at her, his blue skin pale with shock. His powerful arms hung limp and useless at his sides. "Ambassador Chen," he managed to say, "I believe you have a great deal to explain." Elena gave a slow nod. "Yes," she thought, "I certainly do, and I will." But first, they all needed to understand one crucial thing. She scanned the chamber, locking eyes with one alien species after another. "No one is going to harm you, no one is going to conquer your worlds, and no one is going to enslave you. What you just saw wasn't an attack. It wasn't the start of some new galactic war." She paused, letting the words sink in. It was a rescue. It was what humanity has been preparing to do for 847 years. And now, I'm going to tell you the truth about my people, the truth we've kept secret for nearly 1,000 years, the real reason we chose to be simple farmers when we could have been so much more. The Ghost Fleet kept moving closer, silent, patient, and waiting. And the entire galaxy waited with it, about to hear the biggest secret it never even knew existed. The silence in the council chamber was suffocating. It felt heavy, pressing down on everyone, making it hard to catch a breath, hard to even think. On the main screen, the Ghost Fleet had halted. 15,000 black ships just hung there in the darkness, a wall of pure night, waiting. They were now less than 1 hour from Concordance Prime. Ambassador Elena Chen walked slowly from the human delegation's seats to the central podium. Every single eye followed her. Every sensor in the room tracked her every move. For 800 years, humans had been practically invisible. Now, in a single moment, they were the only thing anyone in the galaxy could see. Elena reached the podium and turned to face the assembly. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a weight, something ancient, something heavy. 847 years ago, she began, a Fenari scout ship stumbled upon Earth. Humanity was just a baby species back then. We were barely starting to explore our own solar system. We had these grand dreams of what the galaxy would be like. We pictured meeting wise, ancient aliens who would share their knowledge with us. We dreamed of joining something bigger than ourselves. She paused. Instead, we learned the truth. The galaxy wasn't a place for wisdom and sharing. It was a jungle of empires and conquest. The strong preyed on the weak. The weak either served or they were wiped out. The only law was power. The only justice was strength. Around the chamber, representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What Elena said wasn't polite, but nobody could say it was wrong. When we joined the Galactic Union, we were given a choice. We could either try to build fleets and compete with species that had been spacefaring for millions of years, or we could find another path. Elena's hands gripped the sides of the podium. You chose to be farmers, High Chancellor Veith Nar said, his voice laced with bitterness. You chose to be nothing. No, Elena corrected him softly. We chose to appear to be nothing. There's a big difference. She touched a control on the podium, and the main screen flickered to life. It now showed a view of Earth, a beautiful swirl of blue, green, and white hanging in the void. On the surface, we became exactly what the galaxy wanted us to be. Farmers, artists, thinkers. We grew your food. We wrote poetry. We debated philosophy. We were peaceful. We were harmless. We were completely forgettable. The screen changed again, showing something else entirely. A dark, empty patch of space between galaxies, a place where absolutely nothing was supposed to be. But beneath the surface, in the deep, hidden places, in the folds of space-time that other races hadn't even found yet, we were doing something else. We were preparing. The image zoomed in. In that black void, massive shapes started to become clear. Unbelievable structures, shipyards that spanned light years, factories churning out weapons based on impossible designs, and training academies where humans lived their entire lives mastering the arts of war. For 847 years we built, Elena went on. We studied physics the rest of the galaxy called fantasy. We created weapons that operate on principles your top scientists haven't even dreamed of. We built our ships in dimensions your sensors can't even penetrate. And we trained our crews, generation after generation. Entire families who lived and died in that deep void, never once seeing Earth, never knowing any life but this. All of them waiting, all of them preparing for the one day they might be needed. The chamber was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Not a single being moved or made a sound. We call it Terra Obscura, Elena said. The dark Earth. 15,000 ships with technology 500 years more advanced than anything in this galaxy, and crews who have spent their entire lives training for one single job, to protect. To conquer, hissed Representative Seiler from his seat. You mean to conquer? Elena turned to face the snake-like alien. Her calm expression didn't waver for a second. If we had wanted to conquer you, Representative, we would have done it centuries ago. We could have taken over this entire galaxy at any time in the last 500 years. We chose not to. Do you get it? We chose not to. But why? Asked Ambassador Trix, her voice small and filled with confusion. Why hide all that power? Why pretend to be so weak when you were so incredibly strong? Elena paused for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was much softer. Because a long, long time ago, humanity learned a terrible lesson. Before we ever met another species, we spent thousands of years doing to each other exactly what the Krarth do to this galaxy. We started wars. We committed genocide. We enslaved and tortured and destroyed each other. We were as monstrous as any species that has ever lived. She let that sink in. And then one day, we finally saw what we'd become. We took a long, hard look at ourselves, and we were filled with shame. A deep, soul-crushing shame. We nearly wiped ourselves out before we finally found a better way. We learned that power without wisdom is just a path to destruction. That strength without compassion is just cruelty. We learned that the ability to cause harm means nothing if you don't have the self-control to choose not to. Elena looked around the chamber once more. When we joined the galaxy, we saw the same old story playing out. The strong crushing the weak, the powerful destroying the helpless. And we knew that if we showed our true strength, we'd just become the next big monster in the schoolyard. Others would fear us, and fear always leads to enemies. Enemies lead to war, and war always leads to suffering. We had no desire to become another empire. We didn't want to become the new Krarth. So you hid, the Chancellor stated. So we hid, Elena confirmed. We became farmers. We made ourselves invisible. We let other species feel like they were the powerful ones. We let them think they were the ones in charge. And every single day for 847 years, we made the choice not to use the incredible power we had built. Every single day, we chose peace. She turned her gaze back to the main screen. The ghost fleet was still there, silent and motionless. But we also made a promise to ourselves, a promise to every human who ever lived. We promised that never again would we just stand by and watch while innocent people were slaughtered. Never again would we witness a genocide and do nothing. We promised that if the day ever came when a great evil threatened to swallow the galaxy whole, we would step in. We would protect. Elena's voice hardened. The Krarth came to conquer this galaxy. They came to enslave billions. They came to wipe out entire civilizations. They came to do the exact same things humanity once did to itself. And that, representatives, is the one thing we will never, ever allow. Not while a single human still draws breath. The chamber was still silent. Elena continued. We never wanted to reveal ourselves. We hoped we would never have to. For 800 years, we hoped the galaxy would learn to stand up for itself. We hoped peace would become stronger than war. We hoped people would choose to work together instead of conquering each other. She shook her head slowly. But hope isn't a strategy. The Krarth proved that. 12,000 warships, 40 conquered star systems, billions of slaves. That's what happens when no one is strong enough to just say no. That's what happens when evil is allowed to grow without a challenge. On the screen, the shattered remains of the Krarth Armada drifted through the void. Thousands of wrecked ships, once the most feared military force in the galaxy, were reduced to scrap metal in just 11 minutes. Now you know what happened, Elena said. You know what the Ghost Fleet is. You know where it came from. You know who we really are. She stepped away from the podium. The only question now is, what do we do next? The silence stretched on and on. Finally, High Chancellor Vathnar broke it. What? What do you want from us, Ambassador Chen? What are humanity's demands? Elena looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then, a slow, sad, and tired smile touched her lips. Nothing, she said. Vathnar blinked all four of his eyes. Nothing? Nothing. We don't want your planets. We don't want your resources. We don't want you to obey us or worship us or fear us. We want absolutely nothing from you. Then why? Trix asked, her voice trembling. Why build a fleet like that? Why hide for so many centuries? Why save us? What's the point if you want nothing for it? Elena was quiet for a second. When she finally answered, her voice was barely a whisper. Because it was the right thing to do. Because innocent people were about to die, and we had the power to stop it. So we did. Because that's what humanity decided it wanted to be 800 years ago. Not conquerors, not rulers, protectors. We protect because protecting others is a good thing. We save lives because saving lives is a good thing. We don't need any other reason. We don't need a reward. She looked around the chamber one last time. The Terra Obscura fleet is going to return to the void. We will go back to watching. We will go back to waiting. Humanity will go back to being your farmers and your artists and your philosophers. Nothing has to change. In a few generations, you'll probably forget all about us again. And that's okay. In fact, that's exactly what we want. Elena's voice then became firm, a final quiet promise. But you need to remember this. There are guardians out there in the dark. If any species ever tries what the Krath did, if another empire rises on a tide of slavery and destruction, they will meet the exact same end. Not because we crave power, and not because we want control, but because some things are just plain wrong, and some wrongs have to be righted. She turned and walked back toward her seat. That is the truth of humanity. That's the secret we have kept for 847 years. And now, you know. Behind her, the ghost fleet hung in the void, silent, patient, and ready, and for the first time in its long history, the Galactic Council had absolutely nothing to say. The chamber was frozen in silence for almost 5 minutes after Elena Chen sat back down. 200 species, some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, just sat there, completely stunned. They didn't know what to say. They couldn't even figure out what to think. Finally, Representative Seiler uncoiled his long body from its perch and slithered toward the center of the chamber. His scales shimmered in the light as he turned to face the human delegation. "You deceived us," he hissed, his voice dripping with fury. "For 800 years you've been lying. You pretended to be weak, to be harmless. You watched us struggle and fight and die, and you did nothing. You had the power to stop wars. You could have saved millions, and you chose to hide." Elena looked back at him, her expression unreadable. "Yes. Don't you feel any shame?" Seiler demanded. "Don't you feel any guilt for the countless lives you could have saved?" Elena was quiet for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy, filled with an ancient, aching pain. "Every single day," she said softly. "For 847 years, humanity has carried that weight. We watched conflicts we knew we could end. We saw suffering we could have prevented, and we did nothing." She rose slowly to her feet. "Do you have any idea how hard that was? Can you even imagine what it cost to hold that much power and choose not to use it? To watch people die knowing you could save them, but also knowing that stepping in would unleash something far, far worse?" She walked forward again, not to the podium, but to the very center of the chamber, surrounded by a sea of alien faces. "We made a choice," she said, "a horrible, heartless calculation. We knew that if we revealed our true strength, other species would fear us. That fear would curdle into resentment. That resentment would forge alliances against us, and sooner or later, it would lead to war. A war on a scale this galaxy has never imagined. A war that wouldn't kill millions, but trillions." She locked eyes with Seiler. "So we hid. We let the small wars burn themselves out so the great one would never start. We let thousands die so that billions might live. We chose the lesser of two evils." "That's a very convenient excuse," Seiler said, his tone like ice. "It's not an excuse," Elena replied. "It's a confession. We know exactly what we did. We live with the cost of that choice every day. Every human alive carries that burden. It's the price of being a guardian. You can't save everyone. You can only try to save as many as you can." Ambassador Trix, a small bird-like creature, stood up, her body trembling. "But why show yourselves now? If your entire strategy was to stay hidden, why reveal the truth?" Elena turned to her. "Because the Krath were different. The Krath weren't a small war. They weren't just some regional squabble. They were on a mission to conquer everything. Every species, every world, every single being in this galaxy would have been enslaved or wiped out. That wasn't a small evil we could turn away from. That was the Great War we had spent centuries trying to prevent." She opened her hands in a gesture of finality. "We had no choice. Either we revealed ourselves or we watched the galaxy fall into darkness. And whatever our sins, whatever our secrets, we could not let that happen. Humanity might be willing to let small evils pass, but we will never, ever stand by and watch total darkness win." High Chancellor Vathnar leaned forward in his massive chair. "Ambassador Chen, I have to ask you a direct question. I need the truth." "Ask," Elena said simply. You claim you want nothing from us. You say you'll go back to being simple farmers. But how can we possibly believe you? You've been lying for 800 years. Why should we trust a single word you say now?" Elena nodded slowly. It was a fair question. "You shouldn't trust us," she said. "Not based on words, anyway. Words are cheap. Anyone can make promises. The Krath made plenty of promises right before they devoured their first world. Words mean nothing." She reached into her pocket and took out a small, sleek device. With a press of a button, the main view screen overhead flickered to life. "Let me show you what trust really looks like." The screen displayed a planet, a breathtakingly beautiful world of deep blue oceans and vibrant green continents. It hung in the blackness of space, peaceful and alive. "This is the planet we call New Haven," Elena said. "It's one of 12 colony worlds we founded in the deep void, far from any known star maps. It's been settled for 300 years. 7 billion humans call it home." She pressed another button. The view zoomed out, showing the space around the planet. There was nothing there. No defense platforms, no weapon satellites, no orbital stations, nothing. "New Haven has no military presence," Elena continued. "No weapons, no shields. If any of you wanted to attack it, you could wipe it out with ease." A wave of murmurs and whispers swept through the chamber. "This is our proof," Elena said, her voice clear and strong. "We've just shown you where our people live. We've shown you that they are completely defenseless. If we were planning to conquer you, would we give you such a perfect target? If we were your enemy, would we hand you a hostage?" She switched off the device. "Humanity's strength isn't just in our fleet. Our real strength is our willingness to be vulnerable. We are trusting you not to attack New Haven. We are trusting you not to harm our people. And in return, all we ask is that you trust us not to harm yours." The chamber fell silent again, but this was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't shock or fear. It was something else, something closer to understanding. "You could have kept that a secret," Buthnar said, his voice low. "You could have demonstrated your power without ever showing us your weakness. Why tell us about New Haven?" Elena offered a small, sad smile. "Because trust is a gift, Chancellor. It has to be given freely, or it isn't worth anything at all. We are giving you our trust. What you do with it will show us what kind of galaxy we're really living in." A long silence stretched on. Then, surprisingly, a massive being made of living rock began to speak, his voice a low rumble like shifting continents. "I have lived for 3,000 years, he grated. I've watched empires rise and crumble. I've seen species flourish and fade. I've seen great evil and very little good." He paused. "I have never seen a species reveal its greatest weakness to those it could easily destroy. I have never seen such trust offered so freely. I don't fully understand humanity. I probably never will. But I believe you, Ambassador Chen. I believe you are exactly who you say you are." One by one, other representatives started to speak. Some were still angry. Some were still afraid. But a growing number of them began to voice something new: respect, awe, even gratitude. "What about the Krath survivors?" someone called out. "The crews on the ships that surrendered? What will happen to them?" Elena nodded. "An excellent question. We will not destroy them. We will not enslave them. We won't even punish them." This sent a fresh wave of confusion through the chamber. "They came to wipe us out," Siler sputtered. "They came to conquer and kill, and you're just going to let them go?" "No," Elena corrected him gently. "We're not going to let them go. We're going to help them." She signaled, and the view screen lit up again, showing another planet. This one was wilder than New Haven, with rugged mountains and harsh, beautiful landscapes. But it was clearly habitable. "This world has been prepared for the Krath survivors," Elena explained. "It has shelters, food, water, everything they need to start over. We will take them there. We will give them tools and knowledge. We will give them a chance to build a new society." "But why?" Trix asked, her voice filled with genuine confusion. "They're your enemies. They would have annihilated you." Elena held her gaze for a long moment. Representative Trix, do you know why humanity almost wiped itself out centuries ago? Trix shook her head. Because we used to believe that enemies were problems that had to be eliminated. We thought the only way to stop evil was to destroy the people who did evil things. Kill the enemy, and the war is over. Simple, clean, final. Elena's voice grew quiet, almost a whisper. But it never worked. Every enemy we destroyed just created new ones. Sons seeking revenge for their fathers, daughters wanting justice for their mothers, entire nations nursing old wounds. The killing never ended because the hate never ended. Violence just bred more violence. Death just created more death. It was a cycle with no end. She looked around the silent chamber. When humanity finally broke that cycle, it wasn't because we got stronger. It was because we got wiser. We learned that enemies aren't problems to be erased. They're people to be redeemed. You don't destroy evil by killing the evildoer. You destroy evil by showing the evildoer a better way to live. She gestured to the planet on the screen. The Krath were taught that conquest was the only way. Their entire culture was built on the idea that the strong must rule the weak. That is evil, yes, but it is a learned evil, and anything that can be learned can be unlearned. Elena's voice became firm again. We will give the Krath survivors a second chance, a chance to build something new, a chance to become something better than what they were. Maybe they'll fail. Maybe they'll cling to their old ways and try to rebuild their empire of cruelty, and if they do, we will stop them again. But there's a chance, a small one maybe, that some of them will choose a different way forward, a chance they'll become something more. A faint smile touched her lips. That single hope, representatives, is far more precious than their total destruction could ever be. It's the very reason humanity offers mercy, even when our hearts cry out for vengeance. The chamber fell silent, but this was a silence of reflection, of deep consideration. High Chancellor Vithanar rose to his feet with the slow grace of age. Ambassador Chen, he began, his voice resonating with newfound respect, I have served this council for 70 years. I thought I had seen everything, but today proved me wrong. I have never encountered a species quite like humanity. He offered a formal gesture of deference. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I thank you for saving us, for placing your trust in us, and for showing us that true power lies not in destruction, but in restraint. Elena offered a slight bow of her head. Your thanks aren't necessary, Chancellor. We simply did what was right, and that is its own reward. But as she walked back to her chair, the crushing weight of 800 years of secrecy settled upon her. The cat was out of the bag. The galaxy knew. There was no going back to the shadows for humanity. The future was a blank page, but it was a future of their own choosing. One built on openness, not concealment. One founded on trust, not fear. For better or for worse, the universe had just changed forever. It had been 3 days since the final battle. 3 days since the Ghost Fleet materialized from the void and single-handedly dismantled the most powerful armada in the galaxy's history. 3 days since humanity's greatest secret was laid bare for all to see. The story had rocketed to every known corner of space. Billions of beings were glued to holographic replays of the battle, watching in disbelief. Trillions more listened to Elena Chen's speech, translated into countless languages. For the very first time, the galaxy at large learned of the simple farmers who were also silent guardians, the unassuming species that had been concealing unimaginable strength. The reactions were a whirlwind of extremes. Many species rejoiced, hailing humans as heroes and saviors, flooding Earth and Concordance Prime with messages of immense gratitude. On a dozen different worlds, humans who had lived in quiet obscurity were suddenly being celebrated as distinguished guests. But for others, celebration was replaced by a chilling fear. If humanity could hide this much power for this long, what other secrets were they keeping? Could they truly be trusted? Should a preemptive alliance be formed against them before it was too late? Waves of panic rippled across certain star systems, even though humans had made no hostile moves. And then there were the species who felt nothing but shame. For 800 years, they had dismissed humanity, treating them like simple-minded agrarians, good for little more than cultivating food. The sudden stark realization of their arrogance was a heavy burden to bear. Back on Concordance Prime, the council remained in session. For 3 sleepless days, they had debated, pausing only for the briefest moments of rest. What did this revelation mean for the galaxy? What new laws were needed? What had to change? Ambassador Elena Chen sat in her designated seat, observing the frantic discussions through exhausted eyes. In those 3 days, she must have answered the same questions 100 times. Why did you keep this a secret? What is the true extent of your power? What are your intentions? She gave the same honest answers every single time. Sometimes they were believed and sometimes they were met with suspicion. But these debates were no longer her primary focus. The galaxy's reaction was now in the hands of others. Elena's part was done. She had told the truth. All she wanted now was a moment of peace. A gentle chime sounded from her personal communicator. Glancing at the message, she quietly rose from her seat. "Pardon me," she whispered to her aides. "There's a matter I must attend to." She exited the grand chamber, her footsteps echoing through the corridors of Concordance Prime, until she arrived at a secluded observation deck. The room was empty, save for a single figure standing by the vast window, gazing out into the star-dusted blackness. It was a human woman dressed in a stark black uniform, Admiral Sarah Okonkwo, the Supreme Commander of the Terra Obscura fleet. Elena came to a stop beside her. For a long, quiet moment, neither woman said a word, sharing the silent vigil of watching the stars. "How are the crews holding up?" Elena finally broke the silence. Sarah took a long, weary breath, a mix of exhaustion and relief in her eyes. "Some of them are just crying," she admitted. "They've dedicated their entire lives to a fight that seemed like it might never happen. Now that it's over, they're lost. They don't know what to feel." She turned her gaze from the stars to meet Elena's. "A few have put in requests to go home, to finally see Earth. A lot of them have never set foot on a planet. Their grandparents were born deep in the void. All they have are stories of blue skies, green forests, and endless oceans." Elena nodded in understanding. "They can go. Anyone who wants to. They've more than earned it." "But most won't," Sarah said softly. "Most will choose to return to the void, back to their watch, back to the waiting." "Why?" Sarah offered a tired, sad smile. "Because the mission isn't over. The Krath are defeated, yes, but someone else will rise to take their place. There's always someone else. Somewhere out there, another will decide that conquest is a shortcut to greatness. Someone will raise an army to seize what isn't theirs, and when that day comes, we have to be there to stop them." She looked back out at the sea of stars. "That's the heavy price of being a protector, Ambassador. The job is never truly done. The watch never, ever ends. You don't just save the galaxy once and call it a day. You have to be ready to save it over and over and over again, forever." Elena remained silent. She understood that weight all too well. She had carried a similar burden for 30 years as an ambassador, the weight of knowledge, the strain of the facade, the loneliness of secrets. "I brought up the Krath survivors with the council," Elena said, changing the subject. "They've agreed to let us oversee their rehabilitation. No other species was willing to take on that responsibility." Sarah nodded. "We've already moved them to the new sanctuary world. Most are still in a state of shock. Some are lashing out in anger. We've had a few try to attack our personnel." "Any casualties on our side?" "None. Our people are trained for exactly this. They know how to be patient. They know when to just wait." Sarah paused for a moment. "There is one, though, a Krath who keeps demanding to speak with a human leader. Admiral Vorath. He made it through the battle. He says he needs to understand." Elena arched an eyebrow. "Understand? Understand what?" "Everything, from the sound of it. Why we rescued his people. Why we didn't just wipe them out when we had every opportunity. Why we're offering help to the very ones who came to enslave us," Sarah said with a shrug. "The man is broken. His entire worldview has been shattered. He has no framework for what he's witnessed." Elena considered this for a moment. I think I'd like to speak with him. Someday. When the dust settles, I'll make the arrangements. They fell into a comfortable silence once more. Through the massive window, one of the ghost ships was just visible, a sliver of impossible black against the starfield, waiting patiently to fade back into the void and resume its endless patrol. Do you think it was all worth it? Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. 800 years of hiding, 800 years of watching from the darkness, was it worth the price we paid? Sarah took a long time to answer. I honestly don't know, she admitted at last. I know what we stopped from happening. The galaxy is still free. Billions of souls are breathing today who would have been in chains. That has to mean something. It has to. She hesitated. But I also know what it cost us. Generations of our people who never felt natural sunlight on their skin. Entire families who lived and died in the deep dark, knowing nothing but duty. Children who learned the arts of war before they learned to read. We sacrificed so much of our own humanity to become the protectors. Sometimes I wonder if we sacrifice too much. Elena had no reply to that. It was an unanswerable question. The galaxy knows we exist now, Elena said instead. Things are going to change. We'll be hated by some, feared by others. Many will try to manipulate us for their own gain. Life as we knew it is over. No, Sarah concurred. It's not. She turned to face Elena, a flicker of something new in her eyes. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Maybe this is what the galaxy needed. Maybe it's finally time for humanity to come out of the shadows and take our place in the universe, openly and honestly. We've been ghosts for so long. Maybe it's time we stopped. Elena managed a small smile. That's a surprisingly hopeful outlook from the commander of a secret ghost fleet. Sarah's smile mirrored her own. Well, one of us has to be. If the protectors themselves lose hope, what chance does anyone else really have? Just then, the door behind them slid open. One of Elena's aides stood there, looking apologetic. Ambassador, my apologies for the interruption. The Council is requesting your presence again. They wish to begin discussing the terms of humanity's new, formal relationship with the Union. Elena sighed softly. More meetings, more pointed questions, more careful explanations. The work of a diplomat, it seemed, was as endless as the work of a protector. I'll be there in a moment, she said. The aide gave a quick nod and departed. Elena turned back to Admiral Okonkwo. I suppose this is it for now. Sarah offered her hand and Elena shook it firmly. Keep the galaxy safe, Ambassador. We'll be out there in the void, watching, just like always. And you take care of your people, Elena replied. You're not just a weapon, you're our people too. Never forget that. Sarah's smile was genuine this time. We'll try. And with that, they went their separate ways. Elena made her way back to the council chamber to field more anxieties and navigate a galaxy's worth of uncertainty. Sarah returned to her flagship, ready to rejoin the fleet that had stood as the silent, unseen shield of the galaxy for 800 long years. A few hours later, the Terra Obscura fleet began to stir. One by one, the pitch-black vessels engaged their dimensional drives. One by one, they silently slipped out of reality, vanishing back into the interdimensional void where no sensor could ever hope to find them. Inside the council chamber, the assembled representatives watched their departure on the main view screen. Some sighed in relief, others shifted in fear, and a few felt an unexpected pang of sadness. But it was Elena Chen who watched with the heaviest heart of all. She knew exactly what those ships stood for. She knew the profound sacrifice made by every soul aboard them. She knew the eternal weight they carried, the burden of a watch that would never ever end. The last enemy ship blinked out of existence. The view screen showed only the silent, empty void where a moment ago the impossible had happened. Ambassador Chen, the High Chancellor's voice was barely a whisper. Will they come back? Elena met his gaze. Only if they're needed, she answered. Only if another threat of this magnitude rises against the galaxy. Otherwise, they'll go back to waiting, to watching from the shadows, just like they've always done. She gestured back to the star-filled screen. That's what real strength is, Chancellor. It's not measured by what you can obliterate. It's measured by what you choose to defend. And humanity will always, always choose to defend. It's just who we are. In the silent black emptiness between galaxies, 15,000 colossal warships resumed their silent, endless patrol. On board, crews settled back into their long-practiced routines of training, watching, and waiting. They had no idea when the call would come again. Maybe in 1,000 years, maybe tomorrow morning. It didn't make a difference. They would be ready. That was the price of being humanity's guardians, a burden they shouldered with a quiet, unshakable pride. On a dimly lit observation deck, a young crewman stared out into the sea of stars. He'd never set foot on Earth. He'd never felt a breeze on his skin or rain on his face. He was born to the void, just like his parents and their parents before them. But he knew exactly why he was there. He knew who he was protecting. And he knew that light years away, on worlds he would never visit, billions of people were safe to live their lives in peace because of him and his crewmates. That thought was enough. It would always be enough. A small smile touched his lips as he turned and walked back to his post. The long watch continued. The unseen protectors remained vigilant, and the galaxy, for now, was safe.